Hi, my name is Guy Lawrence, and thanks for tuning into my podcast today. If you're enjoying these conversations and you want to check out more of this transformational work, be sure to come back to guylawrence.com.au and join me as we go further down the rabbit hole. Enjoy the show. Natalie, welcome to the podcast.
Hi, thank you. Thanks for having me.
I always start the show with, if you were at an intimate dinner party, like at a dinner table right now, and you sat next to a complete stranger and they asked you what you did for a living, what would you say?
Oh, well, that's a good question. I would probably just say that I am retired and an artist. I do readings, I do psychic readings for people and consultations.
Okay.
But I generally don't tell people that unless I know that they're kind of in the field, because I don't know how that is going to go over. And I'm not here to convert anyone or to get in an argument or anything. So it's easier just not to say anything unless I know that they're interested in that kind of thing.
Yeah, but it really depends on who's sitting opposite you, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
And where they're at. I can so relate to what you're saying. Well, what kind of art do you do, by the way?
Well, I do collage and an unusual form of oil painting. And I do things like so quilts, and I'll try anything. I've done a lot of ceramics in the past.
Yeah.
And yeah.
Yeah, beautiful, beautiful. Well, I'm like I said, I've came across your work via Paul Selig of all people. He mentioned your name, and it sparked my interest. And Paul's a beautiful human being, and he's been on the show twice, and I'm always blown away by this work and what things come forward. And then when I checked you out and the book you had written and your personal journey, I was like, oh my God, I really hope Natalie will come on the show and share a little bit about her experiences, because they're not everyday experiences that you hear. And I think a great place to take us back is I believe you were an archaeologist for 16 years. Is that correct?
Yeah, I was. I just did surface survey archaeology and some testing. I didn't do digs, full-blown digs. So basically, I was walking and looking for sites on the surface of the land. And then when I'd find those, I would record them and then evaluate them for the historic, for the sort of a national historic register. And then if somebody else wanted to dig them, they would know where they were, they would know what was showing up on the surface and that kind of thing. So that's
Right, got you. And was it archaeology that led you to Iraq?
Well, I was working as an archaeologist when the Corps of Engineers, U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, put a call out to all federal agencies asking for people to come down and help with Hurricane Katrina cleanup. And that was back in 2005, 2006? I forget. 2000, end of 2005, I guess. And I volunteered for that. So I went down there and worked 1.5 month stints down there and met some other people from other agencies. And a few months later, one of them called me up and said, hey, do you want to work in Iraq? We could work in Iraq if we want to. I said, sure.
Wow.
And hung up the phone and went.
So like a true free spirit, no hesitation, and just
Well, I kind of get myself into things once in a while that way. I had been looking for overseas work. I had said to myself, I think I'll go anywhere but Iraq. I don't really want to go there. It looks like a mess. I don't know what's going on over there. I don't understand what we're doing over there. So, of course, that's where I ended up
and
going.
that's where you end up going, yeah.
Right.
What was going on in Iraq at the time when you arrived?
Yeah, that was supposedly at that point the war was over, haha, and rebuilding efforts were going on. So I was in charge of some of those reconstruction efforts. I was managing some of those contracts. The contracts were all Iraqi contractors, and I had some Iraqi engineers working for me that really did the vast majority of the work. But yeah, we were doing things like building roads and health care centers and sewage systems and, clean water to villages and things like that.
Yeah, wow. And before the accident, I'm sure we'll get into that in a moment, but did you feel safe at the time, or were you always on red alert, or how was the general consensus of where you were at there?
Well, the first half of my time there, I was in an area that was pretty safe the first couple of months. And then the surge happened up north, which kind of shoved all the action down to our area. And then we were getting rockets and mortars into camp, probably, I don't know, between 3 and 10 times a day, maybe. So we were getting a lot of
Wow.
incoming. Yeah, and I was going out in the field a lot because of a particular project that I had. And a lot of times people didn't like to go outside the wire because there was the danger of IEDs, improvised explosive devices on the roads. But at that time we were getting so many rockets that it was kind of a relief sometimes to just get out of camp. And then the second half of my tour there, I was in a different area and there was hardly any incoming at all. I think maybe 2 or 3 times in the next, I don't know, that must have been about 7 or 8 months. So in that area, the IEDs probably were more of a threat.
Yeah, wow, incredible. And while all that's going on, did you at any point think, you know what, I need to just go home, or pull out, this is getting a bit hairy, or was that not in your nature? I'm just,
No, I said at one point that even when I hated it, there was nowhere else that I wanted to be. And that was kind of always true. I knew before I went over there, I figured if I'm going into um, a war zone, even though they weren't calling it that in the US news, then I should be willing to get injured or killed. I don't have kids. That probably helps. I wasn't, I just thought, well, I thought it through, and if I'm not comfortable with getting killed or injured, then I'll go home. But I don't know. I think that I've never been afraid of dying. I think it's a pretty good option. I think it's, I remember that it's really nice and that's okay with me. I think now, having been injured, I would be a lot more wary about being injured because I know how long that can feel.
right. And the
But
recovery
at
and the
the
pain
time,
yeah.
yeah, and the long-term effects, I think. But at the time, no, I was fine. I figured too that if something was going to happen that was really bad, I would probably know about it. I think I thought that I'd be given a chance to avoid it. And I think I probably was. I was tired and I wasn't really paying attention, but there were a few things that happened that in retrospect, I think, oh yeah, well, if I'd been paying attention, I would have recognized those things as a signal, I think.
Right.
That something was going to happen. And I don't know if I would have done anything anyway, but
Anything, yeah.
you don't know. Hindsight, whatever.
Hindsight's a beautiful thing, right? Yeah,
Right.
absolutely. So how long had you been there when the accident happened, and how long had you been there, and what were you doing at the time? Where were you going to or from?
I had been there about a year and a half, a little less than a year
Oh,
and a
wow.
half. And I was outside the wire with 3 colleagues. And when we traveled outside the wire, we traveled with a security team. Normally, there wouldn't be more than 2 of us. But in this case, there were 4 of us. Uh, and so our team consisted of 4 trucks, a lead truck, a second truck with 2 of us in it, another truck with 2 of us in it, and each of those had 2 guards also, their driver and a guard. and then the gun truck, which went behind us and had, I think it had 3 guys in it. So it was an armed convoy.
Right.
And we had been out visiting construction sites. We went to 3 of our water projects, and then we visited a road construction project. And we were on our way home at the end of the day when the vehicle that I was traveling in was hit with an IED, with a roadside bomb.
So the bomb had been planted and the truck had just driven over it, essentially. Is that right? Or...
Yeah, I never actually found out if it was triggered by us driving over it, or some of those IEDs were triggered by cell phone. Someone would be watching from a distance, and then they would dial in a number and it would set off the bomb. And I never did find out, I guess, which way that one was set off.
That's incredible. Were you in the lead truck then, or with the...
No, I was in I must have been in the 3rd truck.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah. And was it only your truck that got hit by that bomb?
Mm-hmm.
That
Yes,
point?
we were traveling, teams traveled with different distances between the trucks, whatever that team liked to do. And we had quite a distance. I don't know, maybe a 1/4 kilometer, a 1/2 kilometer between trucks. So I do have one photograph that the guys in the truck ahead of us took looking back at our truck. You can't really see the truck. All you can see is this column of black smoke. So they were pretty far away from us.
Wow. And how many of you were in the truck at that point?
There were 4 of us in the
4 of
truck.
you in
The
that
driver, the driver and a guard in front of me. The driver and a guard and a colleague of mine and me.
Amazing. And then when how do you recall it? Once the bomb went off, do you actually remember the bomb going off and the blast, or?
I don't. No, I think I was kind of leaning on my hand like this, kind of half asleep. It was, the long end of a long day and very hot, and so I was tired. And all I remember was that that I was not in the truck anymore. There was no I didn't notice the bomb. I didn't notice any explosion.
There's no segue. It was just like you were in the truck.
I was in the truck and then I was not in the truck.
Holy shit. Amazing. So I'm gonna have to ask, what happened then? So you weren't in the truck. Where were you?
Yeah. So I was standing on kind of a little stage, and all around me were like thousands of beings. It was kind of like being in a stadium, and that these beings looked like they were made they had form, but they looked like they were kind of made out of light. And I knew that I was wearing my fatigues, the same fatigues that I had been wearing in the truck. And I was just standing there, and I was downloading information to these beings. And then I'll just shorten it. I let them know that I didn't want to go back, that I was tired of being in a body. I didn't want to go back in the body. And they're like, oh, okay, good, fine. But if you did want to go back in the body, maybe you'd like to try this. And I was like, oh yeah, that sounds like fun. So see, I did it again. I called me up and said, hey, you want to go to Iraq? And I said, sure. But anyway, then I called this.
Sorry, were you scared at this point, or nervous, or like?
No, I wasn't. I seemed to know. I knew exactly where I was. I knew exactly what was going on. I think there was no sense of disorientation. There was no wondering, what is this, or how did I get here? It was all very familiar to me, and I knew exactly what I was doing.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what happened next? Sorry, I cut you off. I was just
that's okay. Yeah. I was just going to nutshell the whole thing and come back to whatever you want to come back to. But then I just call moving from one kind of environment to another blinking, because that's how easy it was. So when I was done kind of doing whatever I was doing with this group, I blinked to another environment that I call the deep rest environment, because that's what I was doing. Like I was going into this really deep quiet, and it was kind of this velvety darkness. It was like a rest and rejuvenation area. And at first there was a couple other beings there, and they were kind of tinkering with the organization of my energy or something. I didn't really interact with them, but that's my sense of what they were doing. It was kind of like mechanics tuning up a car.
Wow.
And I kind of, well, then I blinked to another area that I called the healing environment. I could see the scene on the desert down below, the blown up truck, and us in the truck. And but it was kind of, I could see all that also as energy structures. And I was with another being, or two beings in this environment. One was a good friend, and we were kind of goofing around. We were doing kind of the equivalent of waving a hand and giving me different injuries. And then we would see this kind of holographic picture of what the rest of my life would look like, and we would just fall down laughing. We thought the whole thing was just hilarious. Eventually I chose the injuries that I wanted, wave my hand, poof, give myself those injuries. And then I blinked again, and I was down, kind of standing next to the truck with some other beings, like 7 or 8 other beings, 8 or 9 actually, I think. And we were discussing what I was going to do on kind of a more nuts and bolts kind of level. I had actually, after the deep rest environment, I kind of went back to that big gathering, that big stadium of beings, and we talked more about what I was going to do. But talking at that level is kind of like talking to the architect. And then, standing next to the truck, I'm talking to these beings like I'm the one going to be hammering the nails into the boards.
Yeah.
It's a very,
Yeah.
very different perspective from laughing at injuries to getting ready to hop back into the body that's severely injured. So yeah, that's kind of a overview of what I experienced.
Yeah, that's incredible. God, there's so many different directions that could spark off into. When you had that entire experience, how long did it feel? Like, did it feel like a blink of an eye, or the eternity, or could you not know, or was it just?
I think when I was within it, I wasn't really, I'm not sure how to describe that. It doesn't feel like any time passes, really. It just feels like you are wherever you are. I could say that the deep rest environment, it felt like forever. And yet the blink of an eye, it just, and I can still sometimes go there. I can go back into that and sink in very deeply and feel like, oh, I've been here forever, and then come back out and it's been 5 minutes or something. And this whole experience couldn't have been more than a second or two, because when I popped back into my body, the truck was still rolling down the road. So it hadn't even come to a stop yet.
Wow, amazing. I think I hear the term. I'm sure it was you when I was listening to an interview about, like, we're photons of light compressed into this human being, and if we hold our fist like this and continually squeeze it, if we were to then open it up and release, that's what it kind of feels like when you're outside of your body, that it's very
Yeah, I
freeing.
didn't say that, but it's the good example. Yeah,
Okay.
it is. Because it really does. I mean, now we're kind of, I think it takes a certain amount of awareness to hold ourselves in a body. That's what it feels like to me, to sort of balance ourselves in a body and focus in that particular way. But when you step out of the body, it's so easy. Everything's so easy. Thinking is easy, and creating something is easy, and moving around is easy. It's just easy to understand things on a very in a very fundamental way, to recognize truth, sort of with a capital T. Everything just becomes a lot easier. Yeah,
Amazing. I know
it is.
when we were talking off air, I mentioned about the Kundalini awakening I had experienced, and that amplitude of energy that went through me when I was in a meditative state. I had this expansive experience where I was beyond the body, and all of a sudden I could go, that's what you mean. That's what all the books mean. That's what you've all been leading to. And then when I come back, I was like, so obvious. God, but until that happened, it was just I couldn't compute it.
Yeah, it's just an idea until it happens, right? And maybe you think you can imagine it, and maybe you can imagine it, but when you have the actual experience, it's complete, right? Then you really understand something when you have an experience of it, not just an idea of it.
I'm fascinated as well about what you mentioned about when you're standing on the side with the beings and they're going, oh, should I have this injury or should I have that injury? And the rest of my life could look like this. It could go in that direction. I mean, what are your beliefs now on the hardships that we have in life? Do you think we pre-select our journeys to learn from them, like that we are in the school of life? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, the way I describe that, a school sounds to me too much like lessons and tests, and there's goals that, specific goals that if you don't reach
you
them,
could fail. Yeah.
trouble. Yeah. So I talk about this as life as an exploration. And I think we come here to explore different things and to master them. We just talked about how if you have an experience, you understand it in a different way. You understand it on another level. You really own that. That's your information now, right? And I think that we come here to have those kinds of experiences. And so, there's a part of us that thinks, how come life has to be hard? How come it can't just be fun and can't just be easy? But I think that if we didn't have challenges, I think that number one, if we would be bored. On some level, we would be very bored. But the difficulty of what we're doing comes from our own way of thinking about things. I was in the hospital for about a month after I got blown up, and there was one evening when I was really worried about my eye. I don't really see out of this eye anymore, and I was really kind of starting to feel sorry for myself, and I'm an artist. I really want to be able to see out of both eyes. And all of a sudden, I just had this this moment of perfect clarity. And when I said, well, it doesn't matter, it's only for 40 more years. And to a human mind, you go, 40 more years? Are you out of your mind? And yet, if we would cultivate a different context for ourselves, if we would stop limiting our context to birth, this life, death, if we would open that up to beyond this life, however long you want to make it, is it a cluster of lives? Does it include this sort of feeling of infinity between lives, or Maybe we don't have, maybe some of us don't do multiple lives, but if we begin to imagine a different context for what we're doing, then maybe 40 years is just 40 years and it's okay. It's going to be
Mm.
all right.
Yeah. Wow. And then and I think of Wayne Dyer might have quoted this, but to fully live, you must accept death, and then from that we can begin to fully live, with it being the greatest fear. And I often think about that, even the choices I make on a daily basis. Am I just getting caught up in my programs, my conditioning, or am I actually appreciating the moments that I have here to experience? Because there's such a rich tapestry of experiences that we could have here as a human, you know, and
Yeah, definitely. I mean, infinity is infinite, right? We have a great playground here. Um, but fear really, it doesn't necessarily have to be fear of death, you know, it could be fear of injury or fear of making a fool out of yourself, or,
mm,
you know, there's lots of ways that we curtail ourselves and limit our own choices. Um, and, you know, maybe some of that we came to explore or to, um, to meet and kind of begin to understand how to step above it. Um, but I do think that it will always be to our advantage to step out of our own fear, to rise above our own fear. And that doesn't necessarily mean that you don't feel fear, but to not let that be in the driver's seat, and to say,
absolutely,
you know, sometimes say I'm scared to death of this, but I think it's what I really want to do, and I'm going to just carry my fear along with me and try it.
yeah. What yeah, no, 100%. After the accident, and what injuries had you sustained or had you chosen? And did it then help you overcome them? Or were you laying in the hospital bed thinking, geez, I wish I hadn't chose that. This is hell right now, kind of thing.
Yeah, so I had my right heel was broken by shrapnel. Um, both the bones in my right forearm were shattered, and some of the wrist bones were broken. All the bones on the right side of my face were broken. I had
Oof.
a skull fracture. I had a hole in my skull here, a couple holes,
Wow.
and blunt force trauma injuries to this eye. The retina um, was really tattered and eventually came detached. It was reattached, so I have a little bit of vision in that eye, but the eyes don't line up now, and so the lasting effects are this eye. I kind of see double because it doesn't line up. They don't. It sees less light, and there's no lens in that, so it's fuzzy, but it's still distracting. And I don't really have full range of motion in this arm, although it's it's pretty close. It's pretty good. So it's really the eye. And you know, I think that I I didn't remember this whole thing until a few months after I got out of the hospital.
Okay.
I was I had this I kept having those moments of clarity, like I just told you about, when I was worried about my eye and I thought, oh, it's only 40 more years. I kept having those moments of clarity when I was in the hospital and after I got out. But at some point after I got out, I was still all drugged up, but I thought something happened. I went somewhere. I know I went somewhere when that explosion happened. And I kind of closed my eyes and took myself back into the truck, and boom, the whole thing just as a whole, just crystal clear memory returned for that whole thing. And I think that I know that remembering that I chose my injuries changed the way that I understood my injuries. But that was true even before I remembered the whole thing.
Right.
Um, you know, I think that on some level I remembered it, and that mattered. It made sense to me, or I understood that these injuries made sense for a reason. They weren't just random. That for whatever reason, um, even if I couldn't see that reason as a conscious personality self, that on some level they were valuable to me.
Yeah. Yeah, fair enough. And the experience you had, did it feel when you're there, does it, I'm just for people trying to wrap their heads around it that would be listening to this today, did it feel as real as this reality? Did it feel more, less like a dream? Like, how do you describe it?
No, I feel it's more real than here. It's more real than this reality.
Wow.
I've heard other people say the same thing. I don't know how to describe it if you haven't had that
Mhm.
experience, because you think, well, isn't this as real as it gets? You know, this is what we're here for. We're in these bodies and in these minds, and this is real. You know, knock on this. It's real. And yet, if you have that experience, you really, I think probably you must have had the same feeling when you had that
Yeah.
kundalini. You become um uh yeah, when you're freed like that, you know, when you're like this in the body and then you're like this, you can perceive so much more when you're relaxed. You can perceive so much more when you're aware as a whole being instead of just aware as a personality self through this body.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. How were the other colleagues in the track? Did, did
The colleague next to me, he had more severe injuries. Yeah, a part of his femoral artery was blown out.
oh,
He did keep his leg, um, but he has some um, nerve pain that has never gone away. And the driver, he also is blind in one eye. A piece of shrapnel went into his head and cut his optic nerve, so he's blind in one eye, and he had a lot of injuries to his forearms because he was driving like this. So um, I think he has some nerve pain from the shrapnel in his head too. I haven't spoken to him for a little while, but and then the guard sitting in front of me was killed.
oh, yeah. Wow. Did you ever share your experiences with the other two people in the
I
track?
did actually. I sent them copies of my book. Yeah,
Okay.
and yeah, well, yeah, I don't really talk about them because we all had our own experiences, you
Yeah.
know, and we all have our own perceptions. And they were very gracious and they were very open. I think I know that one of them passed on the book to somebody else, so you know, that's nice.
Mm.
But
Yeah, no, fair enough. And do you ever wonder why that experience happened to you? Like, or you don't question it, you know?
well, I don't. No, I don't really. I've had that question a lot, and I always
Oh,
think,
really? Yeah.
no, I guess I don't. I don't know. I don't ask why a lot, maybe in that way. Um, I think that asking, why did this happen to me? Why did this happen to me? Is often not a very productive question
Mhm.
to ask ourselves. That a more useful thing to ask ourselves is often, how do I best handle this? Because I think the why of things is not always going to be it's not always going to make sense to the human mind. It's not always going to make sense to the personality mind, to the small self having an experience through this body. I saw some of the reason why I chose that to have that happen to me when I was um, when I was remembering this. I could remember seeing, you know, when I chose my injuries, I could remember seeing a whole kind of instant of the whole rest of my life, and understanding on a really broad level why I chose this particular action, why do it this way. And it made sense, but it wouldn't make sense if I talked about it. It would be like, she must be kind of crazy. I honestly just think it wouldn't kind of make sense. And I also think that our cultures like to prioritize things and put things in hierarchical order. So if I described some of what I understand about why I chose this action, I think that people would they'd be saying, well, wonder what I did with that action then, or is that seems like grandiose. Who does she think she is? Or what I'm doing is more important than that. I think that we go there without even really realizing it sometimes. And I just want people to know that there was reason behind it, because I'm not unique in that way. I don't think I'm unique. I think there's a reason, there's purpose, there's value in whatever we experience. Everybody, no matter what your experience, I think there's value. And that I don't think that we can always understand that from our human point of view, but if we can begin to make a little space for faith, maybe in just allowing that may be true, that it maybe is really important, and this is uncomfortable, but maybe it's worth it on some level.
Yeah, beautiful. Your book, Application of Impossible Things, why did you decide to write it, and why the title? I'm curious.
Well, the title just came as soon as I started writing it. That was just in my head, and it wouldn't go out of my head. So that's really why once I started thinking about what might be meant by that, it made sense too, because I think that everything that I experienced has value to, and some kind of application in our lives as they are through these personalities and through these bodies and through these emotions. I think that in my understanding, this world is within the infinite world. So we're not separate from it. We're within it. We're part of it. We're an intrinsic cell within it, or whatever. So what is applicable on the non-physical has some kind of echo here in the physical world. And I wrote the book because first I started writing it just so that I would have a record, an honest record of what I remembered. And I had read some near-death experiences years before, just a couple, and thought, oh, these don't even interest me, because what they tended to do was they wrote a lot about how they got to the near-death experience, and then what happened to them after the near-death experience. But the experience itself was like this much of the story. And I'm like, no, that's the part I want to know about. That's the part people want to know about. We don't want to hear about your whole flight to Timbuktu and your whole flight home. We want to hear about Timbuktu. So I thought, well, here's my chance. I can write about Timbuktu. I can write about what I remember and how I understand that, and what I think can be brought back into this life from that. And so that's what I tried to do. Once I got about halfway through, I thought, well, this is better than I thought. So maybe somebody will want to publish it.
Oh, good on you. Yeah. And were you, because I remember I had Anita Morjani on the show last year, or a year before now. God, we're in 2021, aren't we? 2020 was a blink.
Yeah.
Yeah, and she started the same way because she had her experiences whilst in hospital with a cancer, and then she wrote about it, but she was terrified of putting it out there.
Yeah, I was too.
You were, yeah, okay.
Oh yeah. Yeah, I didn't want to do it. I was like, oh, well, maybe I'll send it to a couple publishers and a couple agents. And if they don't answer, then they don't answer, you know? And then I was just terrified. I thought, oh, if this goes out, people, I don't know. I thought I would lose friends. I thought people would kind of confront me and say, you're crazy. I didn't know what would happen. I don't know. It felt like, it felt big, you know? It felt
Yeah.
really scary. But then once it was out there, it was like, well, nothing happened. Oh, well, this is easier than I thought.
Oh, that's gold. That's gold. Because it is. It's. I mean, I have these conversations on a regular basis now because of what I do. I just have
Mhm,
this curious, open mind, and I'm like, well, I certainly don't know anything, so I need to. There's so much more to this. So having an open, curious mind has been absolutely the greatest gift for me. Where before I was so closed off,
mhm,
and being able to explore these ideas. But outside of that context, I can't imagine. I don't know what the general response is with people if we're so kind
mhm,
of caught up in the human experience constantly. We're stressed to the eyeballs, and you know, and
mhm.
our experience is very physical. Then it can feel like such a stretch to even consider it in the first place. You know.
Yeah, and we've been taught out of these things too, you know, to a certain extent, right?
Mm.
That's not real. That's all a hoax, or that's crazy, you know. So some of these things can feel like you're really opening yourself up to ridicule or um, yeah, I don't know. It can feel like a real leap into the unknown to sort of expose yourself that way.
Yeah, absolutely. Once um once you got the book out now and you're you have these experiences, you do that. Have you have you had more experiences since, or you're not attached to any of that? You just go about your daily life now? Uh,
Oh, I've had some experiences. I don't really talk about them as individual experiences. Um, I think that what is most important is not the the um, the drama of some of these experiences. I think that what's important is knowing that we are more than our physical bodies and more than our emotions. You know, we are an infinite being having an experience through this body and through these emotions and through this mind. Um, and and the more we know that, the more we open up to actual experience of that, I think then we're all, whoever can do that, or whoever is is willing to do that, to know themselves as we really are. Um, I think that some of these transformative experiences just begin to happen to you, or you begin to get more intuitive or psychic, or you know, you have these kinds of things happen to you. But I think that sometimes I think of those things as the tricks. Like you can set out to learn the tricks. You can set out to, you know, learn how to do a psychic reading, or learn how to do Reiki or something. And there's nothing wrong with that. Uh, but I think it's easy to feel like, well, now I know how to do that, so now um, I'm enlightened, or now I'm, you know, closer to enlightenment. Or, but I think of those things as they can be misleading. I think that the real point of knowing those things is to remind yourself every time you have that experience that there's more to this reality than we are admitting publicly right now. You know, that's the point of it. Do you want to? Do you want to learn to use your psychic abilities, or do you want to know yourself from the inside out as a whole being? That seems to me to be the real important thing, and
Mhm.
what people really want, you know. That's what they think they'll get through learning a psychic, to be psychic or something, when really, if you pause and say, what do I really want here, and aim yourself there, you'll probably get those side effects, and that's fine, but you'll have them in a context that makes sense, on a broader texture, and um, and will allow you to carry those tricks too with a certain kind of confident humility, I think. You won't
Yeah,
need to have it on your resume. You'll just be who you are. I think that's the valuable place to be.
that's so well put. Thank you. Yeah, that makes so much sense, doesn't it? Quite often we can go chasing the experiences to try and fulfill a part of ourselves that's missing and hoping that's going to be the answer, where it's then redirecting ourselves away from ourselves when, like you say, if we actually just learn to be and turn the journey inward a little bit and be with ourselves and get to know thyself, then those experiences will come organically from it.
Mm-hmm.
And there's less attachment to it. And we're not always chasing it and wanting
Mm-hmm.
more, and bringing ourselves back.
Mm-hmm.
A couple of questions to before I wrap up the show. Do you after everything that you've gone through now, do you have any daily practices at all, or do you just find yourself the way you live your life is the way of you bringing presence to yourself through art and through different things?
I um, try to meditate every day, and I wish I were better at that, because I think it's a really, really powerful tool. I think it's probably the best tool. Um, but I'm not a specially disciplined person, so a lot of times that kind of gets away from me. But that is the one thing that I aim for as a daily practice.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Beautiful. And a couple of other questions just to get to know is if you could have dinner with anyone from any time frame anywhere in the world, even if a couple of people, you could sit down one night and have a good meal and a conversation, who do you think it would be and why? Anyone
Wow.
spring?
Good question. Whoa. That's so big. Uh, Boy. Maybe maybe it'd be fun to sit down with Jesus, Buddha, Muhammad, and and like oh Crazy Horse or somebody.
Wow. All the big guns for sure.
Yeah,
Yeah,
why
yeah.
not?
Exactly. Why not go big? See what they have to say about it all.
Right.
Yeah. It always takes me back to us. I'll never forget going to just going off on a tangent. Um, some friends invited me to go to this weekend. There was this Kundalini guru yogi guy coming in, and I'll never forget. I turned up in my CrossFit singlet. I didn't know what I was getting into, and I remember sitting there. I can't even sit lotus or anything, and there. But this guy, and I'm like, guru, like, but he was just so full of joy, and he always teased himself, and he never took anything seriously the whole time he was there. He was just an amazing human being to be around. I came away after that weekend just thinking, you're the best. I'd love to hang out with you more. Like
Hmm.
well, all the students are like so serious, and
Yes.
and he was just the complete opposite. Yeah, it was wonderful, really refreshing. I think
Yeah, we have such a preconceived notion that divine things or holy things should be serious and
yeah,
quiet, and really, in my experience, it is that just sort of overwhelming joy and that willingness to laugh that is so big. It's so
mm,
big, and it's so healing. It's so light. We we don't need to we don't need to quiet it all down. It can be kind of fun too, I think.
Exactly. And the point being, the dinner table you picked, I reckon it'd be a lot of fun. I reckon there'd
Yeah,
be a
I
lot of
think it would.
laughter on that, you
Yeah.
know, for sure. For sure. Last question for you, Natalie, and that is, with everything we've covered today, is there anything you'd like to leave the listeners to ponder on?
Mm. Well, I think kind of what I said a few minutes ago about going within. I think that um, we're kind of taught to define ourselves from the outside in. We throw out this question, "Who am I?" to the world all the time, and watch what comes back, and we kind of build this identity with those things. You know, I'm lazy, I'm good with people, I'm kind of a con, I'm whatever. You know, our we listen to what our parents, who our parents tell us we are, our peers, our friends, our teachers, and when you go within and ask yourself, who am I, and open up to having an experience of who you are, not just an idea or not just a list, but an actual experience like that Kundalini experience. This is who you are. You're going to begin to interact with the world differently. You won't feel like the world is imposing upon you, or that you are not the one choosing your experience, um, or you won't always assume um, that things outside of yourself are responsible for your emotions or your state of mind. You'll begin to understand that we are the creators, and that even in the midst of something difficult, you can choose joy. And I don't know, the whole experience of life becomes something different when you can love yourself, when you can come into that affinity with yourself and know yourself. Then it's possible to love everything. You don't have to try to love everything.
Mm.
You just will recognize that same spark in everything else.
Amazing. What a way to end the show. Thank you so much. I
Yeah.
if people want to buy your book, I'm assuming it's available pretty much everywhere from what I can see. Amazon
Yeah, I
and
think so. Yeah, Amazon and some local booksellers have it. I think Barnes and Noble used to have it. They probably still carry it. Yeah.
incredible. I'll make sure I have links in the show notes. Do you have any online presence at all, or do you keep yourself away from all of that kind of thing?
I have a Facebook author page, so that's just under my name, Natalie Sudman, and I do have a blog that I really don't blog on anymore, but I do post interviews like this, links to interviews, and there's all the information about psychic readings. So that's
Oh, wonderful.
traceofelements.com.
Brilliant. I'll make sure everyone listening to this, they can pause, scroll down, click the links, and be sure to keep up to date with you, Natalie. Natalie, just thank you so much for coming on the show today and sharing so openly and beautifully. That was absolutely incredible. And I just want to acknowledge you and thank you because I feel privileged to have had this conversation with you today. Thank
Oh,
you,
it's very
Natalie.
kind of you. Thank you, Guy. It was fun talking with you.
Thank you.